Educational psychology. While reading, read the following text and do the proposed exercises. Assessment as a positive influence on 21st century teaching and learning, a system approach to progress. New assessments must advance competencies that are matched to the area in which we live. Contemporary students must be able to evaluate the validity and relevance of disparate pieces of information and draw conclusions from them. They need to use what they know to make conjectures and seek evidence to test them, come up with new ideas, and contribute productively to their networks, whether on their job or in their communities. As the world grows increasingly complex and interconnected, people need to be able to recognize patterns, make comparisons, resolve contradictions, and understand causes and effects. They need to learn to be comfortable with ambiguity and recognize that perspective changes information and the meanings we draw from it. At the most general level, the emphasis in our educational systems need to be on helping individuals make sense out of the world and how to operate effectively within it. Finally, it's also important that assessments do more than document what students are capable of and what they know. To be as useful as possible, assessments should provide clues as to why students think the way they do and how they are learning, as well as the reasons for misunderstandings. Gordon Commission, 2013 B. No single assessment can evaluate all of the kinds of learning we value for students, nor can a single instrument meet all the goals held by parents, practitioners, and policymakers. As argued below, it's important to envision a coordinated system of assessments in which different tools are used for different purposes. For example, formative and summative diagnostic versus large-scale reporting. Within such systems, however, all assessments should faithfully represent the standards, and all should model good teaching and learning practice. At least five major features define the elements of assessment systems that can fully measure high-quality standards, such as the Common Core State Standards and the Next Generation Science Standards, and support the evaluation of deeper learning. See Darling-Hammond et al. 2013 for an elaboration of the relevance, meanings, and salient features of each of these five criteria. 1. Assessment of higher order cognitive skills. Most of the tasks students encounter should have the kinds of cognitive skills that have been characterized as high level, skills that support transferable learning rather than emphasizing only skills that tap rote learning and the use of basic procedures. While there is a necessary place for basic skills and procedural knowledge, it must be balanced with attention to critical thinking and applications of knowledge to new contexts. 2. High fidelity assessment of critical abilities. In addition to key subject matter concepts, assessment should include the critical abilities articulated in the standards, such as communication, speaking, reading, writing, and listening in multimedia forms, collaboration, modeling, complex problem solving, and research. Tasks should measure these abilities directly as they will be used in the real world, rather than through a remote proxy. 3. Standards that are internationally benchmarked. In terms of content and performance standards, the assessments should be as rigorous as those of the leading education countries in terms of the kind of content and tasks they present as well as the level of performance they expect. 4. Use of items that are instructionally sensitive and educational valuable. The task should be designed so that the underlying concepts can be taught and learned, distinguishing between students who have been well or badly taught, rather than reflecting students' differential access to outside of schools experiences, frequently associated with their socioeconomic status or cultural context, or dependent on tricky interpretations that mostly reflect test-taking skills, preparing for and sometimes engaging in. The assessments should engage students in instructionally valuable activities, and results from the tests should provide instructionally useful information. 5. Assessments that are valid, reliable, and fair. In order to be truly valid for a wide range of learners, assessments should measure well what they purport to measure, be accurate in evaluating students' abilities, and do so reliable across testing contexts and scores. They should also be unbiased and accessible and used in ways that support positive outcomes for students and instructional quality. Process of evidentiary reasoning. The assessment triangle educators assess students to learn about what they know and can do, but assessments do not offer a direct pipeline into the student's mind. Assessing educational outcomes is not as straightforward as measuring height or weight. The attributes to be measured are mental representations and processes that are not outwardly visible. Thus, an assessment is a tool designed to observe students' behavior and produce data that can be used to draw reasonable inferences about what students know. Deciding what to assess and how to do so is not as simple as it may appear. The process of collecting evidence to support inferences about what students know represents a chain of reasoning from evidence about student learning that characterizes all assessment, from classroom quizzes and standardized achievement tests to computerized tutoring programs, to the conversation a student has with her teacher as they work through a math problem or discuss the meaning for a text. People reason from evidence every day about any number of decisions, small and large. When leaving the house in the morning, for example, one does not know with certainty that it is going to rain, but may reasonably decide to take an umbrella on the basis of such evidence as the morning weather report and the threatening clouds in the sky. The first question in the assessment reasoning process is evidence about what? Data become evidence in an analytic problem only when one has established their relevance to a conjecture being considered. Scume, 1987, page 16. Data don't provide their own meaning. Their value as evidence can arise only through some interpretational framework. What a person perceives visually, for example, depends not only on the data she receives as photons on light striking her retinas, but also on what she thinks she might see. In the present context, educational assessments provide data such as written essays, marks on answer sheets, presentations of projects, or students' explanation of their problem solution. These data become evidence only with respect to conjectures about how students acquire knowledge and skill. In the knowing what students know report, the process of reasoning from evidence was portrayed as a triad of three interconnected elements: the assessment triangle. The vertices of the assessment triangle represent the three key elements underlying any assessment: a model of student cognition and learning in the domain of the assessment, a set of assumptions and principles about the kinds of observations that will provide evidence of students' competencies, and an interpretation process for making sense of the evidence in light of the assessment purpose and student understanding. These three elements may be explicit or implicit, but an assessment cannot be designed and implemented or evaluated without consideration of each. The three are represented as vertices of a triangle because each is connected to and dependent on the other two. A major tenet of the "knowing what students know" report is that for an assessment to be effective and valid, the three elements must be in synchrony. The assessment triangle provides a useful framework for analyzing the underpinnings of current assessments to determine how well they accomplish the goals we have in mind, as well as for designing future assessments and establishing validity. See Marion and Pellegrino, 2006. The cognition corner of the triangle refers to theory, data, and a set of assumptions about how students represent knowledge and develop competence in a subject matter domain: fractions, Newton's law, thermodynamics. In any particular assessment application, a theory of learning in the domain is needed to identify the set of knowledge and skills that it is important to measure to the intended context of use, whether that be to characterize the competencies students have acquired at some point in time to make a summative judgment, or to make formative judgment to guide subsequent instruction so as to maximize learning. A central premise is that the cognitive theory should represent the most scientifically credible understanding of typical ways in which learners represent knowledge and develop expertise in a domain. Every assessment is also based on a set of assumptions and principles about the kinds of tasks or situations that will prompt students to say, do, or create something that demonstrates important knowledge and skills. The tasks to which students are asked to respond on an assessment are not arbitrary. They must be carefully designed to provide evidence that is linked to the cognitive model of learning and to support the kinds of inferences and decisions that will be made on the basis of the assessment's result. The observation vertex of the assessment triangle represents a description or set of specifications for assessment tasks that will elicit illuminating responses from students. In assessment, one has the opportunity to structure some small corner of the world to make observations. The assessment designer can use this capability to maximize the value of the data collected, as seen through the lens of the underlying assumptions about how students learn in the domain. Every assessment is also based on certain assumptions and models for interpreting the evidence collected from observations. The interpretation vertex of the triangle encompasses all the methods and tools used to reason from valuable observations. It expresses how the observations derived from a set of assessment tasks constitute evidence about the knowledge and skills being assessed. In the context of large-scale assessment, the interpretation method is usually a statistical model, which is a characterization or summarization of patterns one will expect to see in the data given varying levels of students' competency. In the context of classroom assessment, the interpretation is often made less formally by the teacher and is often based on an intuitive or qualitative model rather than a formal statistic one. Even informally, teachers make coordinated judgments about what aspects of students' understanding and learning are relevant, how a student has performed one or more tasks, and what the performances mean about the student's knowledge and understanding. A crucial point is that each of the three elements of the assessment triangle not only must take sense on its own, but also must connect to each of the other two elements in a meaningful way to lead to an effective assessment and sound inferences. Thus, to have an effective assessment, all three vertices of the triangle must work together in synchrony. Central to this entire process, however, are theories and data on how students learn and what students know as they develop competence for important aspects of the curriculum.